Hello, everybody. This is Steve Cooperman with Scoop Cyber, and welcome to another podcast. We're here at the Carahsoft studios in Reston, Virginia, and a really timely and interesting topic. I've been in enterprise IT my whole career, talking about FedRAMP at companies that needed to get certified and be FedRAMP to even do business with the government, and this is getting turned on its head completely with something called CR26. So we're going to spend the time today educating everybody out, talking about the importance, the benefits, some of the challenge. I'm joined today by Johann Dettweiler, CISO of Stack Armor, Evgeny Gervis, CEO of SafeLogic, and Martin Rieger, Chief Solution Officer at Qanapi.
So I'm the CISO at a company called Stack Armor. Stack Armor, we help companies to deploy very rapidly and then obtain FedRAMP and DISA FISMA authorization. So our specialty is really helping our customers come in, automate, and get ready to go through these processes. We have kind of a weird connection here because we, Stack Armor, have a product that we call the Armory, which is designed to host workloads that need to meet the FedRAMP regulations. And kind of strangely, we tie into both Qanapi and SafeLogic. So Martin, I'll let you kind of explain how all that works.
Qanapi specializes in zero trust at the data layer through a combination of encryption, identity, and zero trust policies that allow companies to connect via API to a solution that ultimately provides them the ability to swap crypto in and out at will, aka crypto agility. We also provide key management services in addition to a few other key tools, but the relationship here and where things kind of get fun is we are the first customer and first solution inside Stack Armor's Armory to be offered to the United States government and then other commercial entities seeking to comply.
Perfect. And Evgeny, SafeLogic plays a very critical role in all this, so maybe explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Steven. So glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. So SafeLogic, we are a cryptographic software company. So we provide FIPS validated cryptographic software modules that really help organizations that need to meet requirements of FIPS full-day cryptography to really accelerate their journey. They can leverage our modules. We can get them certification in their name in less than 2 months. So if traditional process going through the NIST queue takes 2 years, we can do this in 2 months, get them certification in their name, and then maintain software and certification over time. Obviously, very important for FedRAMP. Ref 5 as well as CR26 continues to be important. Of course, I've also been very focused on post-quantum cryptography. We work very closely with NIST. I actually have the honor and the privilege to lead a PQC migration working group at NIST, and we have great collaborators there. All of SafeLogic's cryptographic modules have PQC enabled, going through the full FIPS process, CAVP and CMVP. And of course, we also focus on the broader PQC migration, including things like cryptographic agility as well, and strong entropy and things of that nature. So we tend to be cryptography geeks, so our customers don't have to.
I'm glad someone is. Man,
I've never met anybody in cryptography that's not a geek.
And I think that a really important point there is you allow customers to obtain a validation in their name. Because there are other companies out there where you can go through this process, but then you end up sort of being hidden on the validation marketplace because you're under a third-party name. So really, really cool. Yeah, I mean, we've had the opportunity to work together in the past, and that was something that really floored me is, you get your own listing. That's very important.
That's right.
Johann, what is FedRAMP CR26, and why is it so important?
CR26 is FedRAMP's attempt to sort of modernize and automate their processes. And strangely enough, it also introduces the idea that FedRAMP is no longer an authorization program, they are a certification program. And I mean, that nuance is very slight, but essentially what they're saying now is we are not authorizing you to deploy within agencies. What we're doing is we're certifying that you have demonstrated that you have the materials available to an agency that can properly demonstrate your security. And that's what we're certifying. And they've sort of taken the idea that FedRAMP owns the authorization and they instead said, no, we're going to make sure a CSP has everything that an agency needs to make that decision, but we're making the agencies take it upon themselves to make that decision now. And so in this process, they've introduced an entire new set of rules that are built on top of Rev 5. And then they've also introduced an entirely new certification pathway called 20X. The idea behind 20X is essentially a very rapid certification where they get rid of the 853 controls. They introduce what they call key security indicators, KSIs. The entire point being that if you're going to go through the 20X process, you need to automate that and demonstrate that you implement the KSIs. So they don't want you to work with an auditor, take screenshots, anything like that. What they want and what they expect is that at any moment you can say, here is my dashboard, my JSON file, whatever you use to say, these are the status right now in this moment of the KSIs. And then have very dynamic ways to deliver evidence, very dynamic ways to work with auditors. And then the Rev 5 process is still there, but it's also making a push towards more automated, more kind of punctual documentation, where instead of long narratives, it's simply declarative statements around this is how you're doing it. You know, you still have to implement the 853 controls, but the expectation is now get rid of the narratives and tell me this is how you're doing it and this is how you validated that you're doing it. So even in Rev 5, they're trying to push towards a more automated approach when the assessor comes in to say, you know, here are a generated set of JSON files, or here is an automated process with an outcome that demonstrates that I've implemented certain controls. So, you know, from the top level, it is really pushing FedRAMP towards automation.
If I'm a company that's already FedRAMPed, or I'm thinking of being FedRAMPed, should I be scared of this? Is this something that, you know, as a company, what should be my approach? Do I need to take a class on this? What do I do?
Well, if there's one thing I think the FedRAMP program's been good about, it's broadcasting and in some cases forecasting their desires and their goals and their expectations. So CR26 is a great example of that, right? So 30 days ahead of time, hey, here's what we're getting ready to do. This is what the next 2 to 3 years look like. These are the goals and ambitions. So the answer to that is to say, I don't know if I think they should be worried or concerned. If they already have an ATO in place, then, you know, for them, it's going to be adding to an existing continuous monitoring state and compliance framework that they have in place. And, you know, ultimately, they have the ability and I would almost say flexibility to compensate as well as more or less decide how they want to implement those controls and those key security indicators, because they're basically, there's things they have to do, but nobody's telling them exactly how to do it, right? You need to paint your house, but they're not saying what kind of brush. Do you need a roller? Are you going to use latex or whatever? So yeah, it's very much a situation where the CSPs are being told well ahead of time what they have to do. And there is a vehicle and a path and a approach where they can reach out to the government and say, okay, we disagree or we're not sure what to do here. So they have help.
So I know one of the things Qanapi focuses on and has great solutions is key management.
Yeah. So when it comes to data security, and FedRAMP itself has explicit requirements around key management, and we at Qanapi have a solution that basically allows customers to continuously monitor as well as provide tamper-resistant evidence around that key governance, and that there are requirements across regions, availability zones, in addition to who owns them and how they're distributed. So we have a distributed key management solution that specifically supports this. that is very robust. It is built upon attribute and role-based access controls in addition to identity tied back to that. So all of those elements together are also what supports our data security components. But from a key management perspective, having that type of redundancy and having that consistent and or persistent availability is critical. From almost a post-quantum perspective, which is really what I would say is probably one of the hottest topics right now, there's an expectation that down the road quantum computers are going to be able to bust through everything. Technically, they can break through right now.
Yeah, we've been obviously following CR26 with great interest, and you mentioned the key security indicators, and from everything we see, there's been no dilution of requirements as far as cryptography is concerned, and that's for good reason. I mean, cryptography there is really foundational to digital privacy and trust, right? And you want to make sure that cryptography is well implemented, right? You don't want somebody just one night go to the basement, coded something up, and say, here it is. You want it to actually go through the proper process, right? So with CR26, there's some nuances depending on the level and the sensitivity of the data. But for the more, for the sensitive data, you absolutely still have the requirement to have FIPS validated cryptography. Now FIPS 140-3, and that really has not gone away, right? It's still there, and as a matter of fact, not to talk about post-quantum much, but there's been a very important executive order just came out this week, actually just past Monday, on June 22nd. So the president signed two of them. One was on kind of advancement of quantum computing. The other one is safety, right? So it's really around post-quantum cryptography and set some real timeline for migrating to post-quantum cryptography. But in addition to migrating post-quantum cryptography, the executive order actually reaffirmed that the implementations, the PQC implementations, have to be FIPS validated. I didn't think I was going to see the words, FIPS, and actually mention the NIST CMVP program and the executive order. That was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. And it talked about, it needs to be validated. It also talked about the validation process. There's a lot of, there's attempts to sort of streamline and accelerate, and, SafeLogic actually participates in those efforts. But the point is that whether it's classical cryptography or post-quantum cryptography, when it comes to FedRAMP CR26, the requirements are still very much there, and you have to have well implemented, and what the government means by that is certified, FIPS certified cryptography.
So Martin, what's the ultimate goal? Why did they do this?
I think there's a number of reasons. One is we across the last couple administrations, we've had a lot of memos, a lot of guidance, a lot of change. Who would have thought that the entire government would have access to AI without any guardrails up front, and immediately pull that back? Well, this is really level setting the playing field, right, in terms of explaining explicitly what must be done, how it has to be done, and you're either going to comply or you're not going to comply. And to me, that's their objective here. Now, whether you're talking 853 or you're talking CR26, it doesn't change the fact that encryption is a critical component and set of controls within both frameworks, in addition to the fact that it's been there for whether you look at FISMA, FedRAMP, RMF, or even CMMC, it's built into all of them. I mean, hell, HIPAA is using FIPS, right? So the outcome of this is basically to set the explicit requirements and make sure everybody understands here's what you have to do to be compliant.
Right, so finally, it's not nebulous, there's explicit instructions.
You don't have to guess, you don't have to wonder, you don't have to go, okay, which memo was it that said I had to do what?
So another hot topic I hear all the time with a number of vendors we support is FIPS 143.
Yeah.
But this plays into all this.
So it's the latest and greatest version of the NIST standards for cryptography. So the reality is, the bad guys are not standing still, right? And there's new cryptanalytic attacks all the time, and that's even outside of the quantum computer. So the standards have to keep up. So for 20 years, we had FIPS 140-2, and even within that, there's been changes. But it's actually rapidly approaching September of this year. If you still have FIPS 140-2 module, it will go historical. meaning that it's no longer recommended for new procurements. So the push to move to FIPS 140-3 is real, and we've been doing a lot of work with our customers, as you might imagine, moving them to FIPS 140-3.
Well, and that's because of all the folks that managed to get that 11th hour back in 2022, right before the switch to 140-3. In case you're curious, like, wait a minute, why did that happen, right? Sneaky. But I mean, the FIPS aspect isn't lost, but we talk about FedRAMP and we talk about encryption, but there's no explicit quantum aspects built into FedRAMP yet. They're still relying on NIST, right, to handle that, and the NSA and DoD and the federal government as a whole. You got FIPS 203, 204, 205 that are mandating each have their own specific elements around those quantum requirements that FedRAMP will point to. But for the purposes of this discussion, the requirement of encryption for any federal system, cloud or not, has been there from the beginning.
Right.
Cryptography is probably one of the better highlights of the new direction that FedRAMP's trying to go in, because cryptography lends itself well to automation. If you've properly built your system, you should be able to query it, pull deterministic telemetry that demonstrates the modules that you have in place. And instead of sitting with an auditor and going through every operating system and having someone go into the CLI and open up the page that shows FIPS mode on, and that auditor takes a screenshot, that's incredibly laborious. 9 times out of 10, they'll take a screenshot of one representative thing in the environment and call that good enough. It really was never a great audit of cryptography. Now, moving towards this automated fashion, I think we're going to get much more brutal truth. I think people are going to realize that maybe where they thought cryptography was enabled, maybe it's not fully enabled. But I think we're going to get a much broader scope and spectrum and a much more honest telling of, this is truly where we've encrypted the data. And I mean, the nice thing is FedRAMP has also opened up the ideas that, not everything has to be treated as the same within the environment. This new set of rules is saying, hey, if it's not sensitive data, well, then don't worry about these. Just protect the sensitive data. So I think cryptography is a really good example of where where this direction of the new FedRAMP can be really helpful.
Dovetail on your point just now, there's been fundamental lack of what we call proper cryptographic posture management in general, right? And the need to migrate to post-quantum cryptography is right now really shining the light on that. It's kind of the catalyst. Hey, where is your cryptography in the first place? Do you have visibility into your cryptography? How are you using it today, right? So that cryptographic posture management, which, by the way, there's a lot of existing because of that, a lot of existing cryptographic debt. Forget like quantum computers. If you were to look at live environments right now, you'll still find a lot of SHA-1, AMD5, things that are like classically vulnerable, not just vulnerable to quantum, like have been vulnerable for decades. They're still there. So right now, actually, this PQC readiness is actually forcing us to establish better cryptographic posture management, get better visibility of cryptography, which actually will also help with something like CR26, right? Because you need to have the visibility to know where you have cryptography, and if it's protecting sensitive data, it needs to be FIPS validated. It needs to be PQC. PQC algorithms, like you mentioned, are now part of the FIPS 140-3 standards. The other thing here is you kind of like mentioned the term crypto agility, right? And this is a very important concept these days, because the world in which you could have cryptographic algorithms and for them to be basically the same for 20 years is over. That will not repeat itself, right? So right now, we need to be prepared to properly govern and seamlessly migrate our cryptographic infrastructure in cases where either new compliance requirements or your internal threat model or external threats, or advancements in quantum computing and whatnot are having you migrate. So maybe right now I need to move from RSA and elliptic curves, public key cryptography, and I'm going to move to ML-KEM, FIPS 203. But let's say in a few years, I actually want to move to a new key exchange mechanism from NIST HQC once it gets standardized. It should not be like, oh my God, how do I do that? You should literally be able to go into one place and change ML-KEM to HQC, And that should be able to now get propagated across your cryptographic infrastructure, and you should be able to have that visibility, continuous visibility, to make sure that's in fact happening, and your cryptographic policy gets honored. So
readiness is key, agility.
And there's obvious places where crypto applies and expectations. For example, transport, right? So a lot of companies will decide, am I encrypting the tunnel, or am I encrypting the data and just sending it? So there have been requirements in place that stated when and where certain things should be encrypted, but the government has always left it up to the service providers or worked with them to say what to encrypt, right? And then how long are they keeping it for? What's the sensitivity level? So all those things around the data itself have always been up to the government. From an auditor's perspective, the mechanisms for that encryption, and then those algorithms and modules,
Yep.
Are they historically retired? Are they still active? Do you have a number behind them? So the auditors, when they come in and are looking to understand not just where did you encrypt, but what did you encrypt and why, right? Our statement was always very simple. If you're going to encrypt, it must be FIPS, and that's something that you had to educate customers on right away, because most companies don't even know about this or aren't even thinking about it.
So just spending time with you guys, you are the experts. What's the single biggest operational challenge creates for an organization?
Oh, well, I'll take it probably because cryptography is always a challenge, but something that both BOD 2604, which came out on the 10th of June, and then the new CR26 rules introduce, is a new way of looking at vulnerabilities, moving from a sort of score-based approach to a risk-based approach, where essentially you have to consider, the structure of the component upon which the vulnerability is found. Is it internet reachable? You have to consider whether or not this is a known exploitable vulnerability. Look at things like the KEV, look at EPSS scores. Can the vulnerability be automated? And then, what is the scope of if the vulnerability is exploited? Does it allow full system takeover, partial? Based on those metrics, what used to be for FedRAMP 30 days to remediate high vulnerabilities, 90 to remediate moderate. Now we're talking about, in the situation where something is exploitable, on an internet-based component, you have 3 days to immediately do something about it. And it's also an incident. And so, if you think about what that means, there are teams out there right now, CSPs that are FedRAMP authorized, that struggle with the 30, 90, 180-day timelines. This completely shifts that on its head. You need to be far more dynamic in your approach to vulnerability management, not just being able to determine things like attack paths and then how you're going to associate and even categorize the scores, because FedRAMP is not prescriptive, neither is the BOD. It simply says, you come up with a way to do this, make sure it's solid, because if it's not, you're likely going to get pwned by Mythos or something like
right.
that, So this is really up to you to do this. It behooves you to put in good security.
I think the statement you just made is a conversation we almost have daily around when companies are looking at, for example, Q Day, that day when everybody has access to a quantum computer and can break through everything. The reality is AI is already doing everything we feared Q-Day would bring. We can break through everything right now, right? Which is why encryption is so critical.
It's all just beginning, right?
Yeah, AI is chaining together, they're putting kill chains together with low-risk vulnerabilities that, as humans, we probably wouldn't have even considered or thought of.
FedRAMP actually goes out and just says, consider everything automatable at this point.
Including
unless you can prove otherwise, just consider it to be automatable. And I actually agree. I think we saw that with Fable 5 being in the wild for 4 days or something like that.
There was a 14-year-old that broke through multiple DoD systems. It wasn't even a script kiddie. It literally just said, break in, right?
Yeah.
So back to that point, that's why the encryption at the data layer, not to mention encryption period, is so important. is that, okay, the AI right now, it's breaking in, but if it's not encrypted, it's not protected, well, yeah, that's on those organizations. The least they can do is, if you're building a federal system and it has any kind of sensitivity around it. But the concern, I guess, going back to it, is we're still a few years away from that post-quantum mentality, but it doesn't negate the fact that AI is here right now and already doing everything we're worried about today.
So when we're talking about quantum cryptography breaking encryption, it's a little bit different than something like Mythos hacking into your system, right? Because Mythos, it can bypass a lot of your security, get to the encrypted data, but it still doesn't have the capability to actually break encryption. But that changes with quantum computers, right?
Yeah, and it does, both of those things do come down to ability to really manage and govern your cryptography. Like, I kind of sometimes think about this, and this is a really good point you just made, Martin, in terms of like AI, right? I mean, yes, even before Q-Day, AI is already finding all those 0-day vulnerabilities, right? And some of those are in cryptographic infrastructure.
It's like the evil cousin.
It's like, and do you know
we all have them.
And do you know where that cryptographic infrastructure lives, right? So, and can you easily change it today? Again, forget quantum, just with AI, right? And so the way I kind of think about this is, if we want to go fast with AI, we need to also be able to govern our cryptography properly. It's kind of like this example that people give, the brakes are there to allow you to go fast in the car, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there were no brakes, you couldn't go fast. If you want to go fast with AI, we got to go and build that ability to manage and govern our cryptography. So whether it's Q-Day or it's a 0-day that gets discovered by a Mythos, you know exactly where that is. You can easily migrate, so it's not, you don't have to like cut out the drywall every time you want to change the pipes. You build access panel, you can get in. This is the crypto agility, right? So but yes, both of those things. With quantum, people talk about harvest now, decrypt later, things like that. Pipes are already leaking, got to do something today, but they're leaking for other reasons. Like, with AI is also creating a huge leak, right? And can you discover those pipes and change them out? Right?
Your analogy has like Ricky Bobby sitting on my shoulder saying, "Go faster." So to that point, let's go back to the data layer for just a second. And this is what the situation you just described: harvest now, decrypt later. Crypto agility, yes, but there is still the today's situation, as well as Q-Day, in that is literally the reason we created data layer tools, because they're not just using encryption, we're also using identity, and then we're using zero trust attribute and role-based policies, so that, okay, let's just say it does bust through the encryption. It's not going to matter, because of the fact that those policies that are put in place, along with the identity requirements, will have to be accessible and obtained by an AI, a quantum, or a threat actor. So together, those components offset that. But when that encryption is broken, and we expect it to be broken, a lot of them that's already happened. What is it, like 44 qubits to get through AES right now? So it can be done. It's expensive, unrealistic. But when that date comes, that's where the post-quantum crypto agility aspect comes in to say, okay, that got broken, let's swap it out, but let's have the ability to do it in a simplistic, easy manner, so that you don't have to rebuild the architecture, the framework, or the code base.
The urgency, regardless of this, is exponential related to post-quantum and AI. And
AI has introduced an attack path and an attack ecosystem that is so much faster than it's ever been before. I mean, patch cycles used to be quarterly sometimes, and maybe monthly if you were lucky and had a great company. Like, that's not acceptable anymore. Like, companies are going to have to step up and start thinking about weekly, most likely daily patches. Because that's the thing is these enhanced vulnerability timelines are only going to work if the vendors out there step up their patching cycles as well. And I mean, obviously they're going to utilize AI to kind of help that happen, right? But this new BOD and CR26 is kind of that forcing function, I think, to move the ecosystem towards, look, these things are out in the wild. If you're not actively doing something more than responding to a high vulnerability in 30 days, you got real problems. So I think, again, it's a good step in the right direction.
Martin, if you were talking to a federal CISO and they're considering a new CSP under CR26, what would you tell them to focus on?
Depending on the solution, but let's just assume there's no AI involved. As a component of an agency authorizing a system, I would tell you, without a doubt, I don't think any system, whether it's FISMA, FedRAMP, or other, is going to get away with not addressing post-quantum readiness, right? And along those lines, the rest of the security controls, or KSIs, if you go the 20x route, are going to be there. That's not going away. I think the biggest things that they're looking at, in addition to encryption, are software bill of materials, along with AI bill of materials and things of that nature, as well as what's in their boundaries. So from a security perspective, I don't know that I think any of that's really going to change unless we're looking at folks who don't quite meet the requirements or do have a FIPS 140-2 that's about to expire without a plan or a roadmap. But data and the security of the data is always the first thing they focus on. And protecting that agency's information. So I think encryption is going to be paramount to that.
One thing I would say is that turn a challenge into an opportunity, right? I always think of compliance. I've been in security space for a long time, right? My perspective has always been compliance should be a byproduct of good risk management, right? So in other words, can you take, and I think CR26 is more conducive to that than Rev 5, can you take that and actually make that a core part of your risk management program, such that whatever evidence you need to produce, telemetry is actually all naturally flowing from your risk management process. So in other words, rather than studying for the test, right? Make this part of your risk management program to actually manage your overall risks. And as a CISO, you got to do that. Your job kind of depends on that.
This gives you.
This gives you an opportunity to do that. So
a playbook to get that done.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, this is where I kind of toot Stack Armor's horn, right? Is if you have companies like you guys, you specialize in cryptography. That's what you want to give the government. That's the service. Maybe you don't want to spend a whole lot of time having to develop an entire engineering program around CR26. That's where Stack Armor comes in. Let us worry about that part of it. Allow you guys to deploy your workload in a known good environment where we've done all the research, we've put all the automation in place to meet these new CR26 rules, to also go after FedRAMP 20x. So let us worry about that so that you guys can concentrate on it. Because for a small CSP, I mean, CR26 is going to be difficult. I mean, so much so that, FedRAMP recommends you don't try and read it. You work with it using an LLM agent. That's how complex the consolidated rule JSON is. So that's a lot to take in. So if you're a small company, maybe working with an advisor, come into a company like Stack Armor so that we can worry about all of that for you and let you focus on, your service, what you want to give the government.
Right, and then we have this better together story.
Well, so for instance, part of this, the FedRAMP obviously journey, and I'm not, you guys are much more experts in FedRAMP, but our piece is cryptography, but obviously I know we've worked with Stack Armor before as part of, being part of that stack to kind of, taking something that could be a very tall, a pole in the tent to get to FedRAMP and just kind of making this a non-issue. And same message as what you said. You don't want to be dabbling in this world. Cryptography is difficult. It changes all the time. Even within FIPS 140-2, there's been a lot of changes. It's going to be the same thing with -3. There's constant transitions. You want to let people who do this for a living do this for you
100%.
And just enable you. And then the other controls that
to this day, if somebody comes to us and they say we have our own cryptographic module, I pretty much just pick up the phone and send them to you guys. Because it is, it is that specialty. It's that specialization. Like trying to figure out the validation process for FIPS when you're also trying to improve the product that you're trying to sell to the government, like, that's a very difficult thing to do. And again, like, the answer is not going to be to vibe code your way out of it. Like, it's just not going to happen. To
toot, I guess, our horn for a second. This year, I think 25% of all the cryptographic modules that come out from this CVP program has been basically by SafeLogic. So we have developed certain ability to do this. We wouldn't recommend it.
So to that point, despite our name, we don't create encryption, right? And so while we're in the Armory as kind of the inaugural system, we also are partnered and we leverage SafeLogic's libraries and algorithms and modules in that capacity and enable them, right? So that's kind of that full circle, almost ecosystem there. You worry about the compliance. We'll deal with the customer's framework and API. You guys provide the encryption, and everybody will be happy.
Yeah, one of the great things about working with Carahsoft, we could put a bundle together. So as we wrap up, any thing you want to say to people out there if they're just getting going? Where do they start? What do they do?
Yeah, so it doesn't hurt to familiarize yourself with these things. I mean, FedRAMP recommends digesting their rules, using an LLM, and working with an agent, and that's a great place to start. Go in, start asking questions, start figuring out, how complex is this? There's a lot of tooling out there, both open source and paid programs that do things like gap analysis and things like that. But I mean, I will say, if there are new terms that you're hearing, if you've never heard FIPS 140-2, if you've never heard, validated versus certified versus, what is that? Or you didn't know cryptography was going to be on the table, you really might want to consider reaching out to companies and reaching out to third parties and building that into your security budget. Because, again, trying to start down the path of some of these things when your main focus still needs to be selling to the government, creating a product that the government wants, because everything is going to become more agile. That's the entire point of CR26 is to allow them to authorize systems much, much faster. We've heard, crypto agility is now very important. So everything is becoming more agile, and your competitors are going to be more agile. So you need to focus on your service. You need to make it as good as possible. So, consider reaching out to third parties that have experienced these things.
Perfect. Martin, I know you have a comment on this.
I do. It's a differentiator for first and foremost. I mean, it's required to FedRAMP itself or any kind of compliance element. But from that perspective, valid versus compliant, right, or validated. But also inheritance versus leveraging. And I say those things to kind of emphasize the fact that a lot of companies can be duped into thinking they're good to go, that they're compliant, because they leveraged a product that said we are FIPS compliant, right, without actually being validated by someone like SafeLogic or even the inheritance model, right? SolarWinds comes to mind, right, as an organization who's like, yeah, we don't provide algorithms and modules, we inherit it from the host OS. Only if you enable that or turn it on, right? And a lot of folks got burned by it. And so over the years, we've educated and told folks, you need to make sure all of this is accounted for so that we don't have that, just as a loose example, that SolarWinds situation where there was no FIPS encryption, right? That being said, I think CR26, just to kind of bring it back a little bit, it is going to help in a lot of ways in terms of supporting the audit and giving that real world view into an environment using those key security indicators. I don't think it's going to change anything around preparation and what it takes to get ready for something like that or even implement it. So that's another reason we kind of developed the tools the way we did, is to help simplify that process and get folks up and running in a matter of minutes.
Well, I think in a way, CR26 is making FedRAMP, in my opinion, more accessible, as long as you do it with the right partner. Don't try to do this alone. I think the right way to think about this is, again, risk management. How do you integrate this with your overall security program and kind of make some of those artifacts almost like fall out naturally from that? There is some possibility to use cryptography that's maybe not validated for certain use cases and validated for others. But honestly, if I'm going through this process, do I really want to have to explain to somebody why I thought this data was sensitive or not sensitive, whether it took this path or that path? If I'm working with the right partner, I can just have all of my cryptography be validated, certified, and that argument is closed, and you get, hopefully some competitive advantages also with that by having your certification public. And really kind of take a look again, we talked about crypto agility, cryptographic posture management. You're going to need this to get the visibility for FedRAMP. You're going to need this for your PQC migration. You're going to need to know that the next time, there's improvements to the Mythos model, and there's some. So you're just going to have to be better and fluid at managing, which really underpins your digital privacy and trust, is cryptography.
Yep.
All right, so I think we'll wrap it up, but, spending time prepping for this and spending time with you guys, I learned a lot about CR26 and the importance. I got a good feel for the threat landscape that's ever increasing, the synergies it takes a better together story to solve it. So I'd like to thank Stack Armor, SafeLogic, and Qanapi, pronounced correctly, and the whole audience. There'll be a lot of material out of this, a way to contact everybody, and I appreciate everybody participating. So thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. This is great.